All right, so now that we have created all of the endpoints to create accounts and log people in, log them out, we need to create some endpoints that are actually what we call private endpoints, for which you need to be logged in. So the basic authentication system of our server is now done. So now we can, of course, build the endpoints that we need for, let's say, an app that we're going to build. I'm going to make a very, very simple app as an example here. Just a way for us to store customers. Let's say I want to create an app where I want to keep track of customers of a web shop. So we want to create a model for a customer and then some endpoints for things we can do with the customers. For example, save a new customer. And we can, for example, say that you can only create a new customer if you're logged in, stuff like that. So let's first set up a customer model, just for us to experiment with using things for which you need to be logged in. So I'm going to get Mongoose again. And then we'll create a customer schema. And this is a new mongoose.schema. So the schema for now will just set up a name, and that is going to be of the type string, and it's going to be required. So required true. Now you can of course create anything that you would want for your whole app. We are just going to create a customer which has a name just to experiment with actual authenticated routes or private routes. So let's create a customer model. Is Mongoose, we'll execute the model function, give it the name of customer, and we'll pass in the customer schema. And then we'll module.export this customer. So this is a way for us now to create a new customer. This is a model that describes what a customer in our database is going to look like. All right, so let's go ahead and set up a customer router, so we can create some endpoints. So we'll create a router, and that comes of course from Express. .router, we'll construct a new router and we'll configure it, and at the end we'll do module.export router. And then in our index.js, where we set up our routes, I'm now also going to add a app.use/customer, and then we'll require for the further paths the customer router. There we go. Alright, so let's set up a route here, very simple, that allows us to create a new customer in the database. So we'll say router.post, because let's say we're going to send the name of that customer we want to create to the database. So we post something and we'll do slash. So this will be the path /customer/. And that will create an asynchronous request and response arrow function to handle this request. So I'm not going to do anything crazy here. I'm just going to set up a try and catch block again. Actually, we can just copy the catch from one of these endpoints here. It's the same idea. And the only thing that I'm going to do here is just destructure the name from the request.body. And then I'm going to say const new customer. I'm not even going to do any validation here, just to create it very simply. So we'll get the customer model. And this will be require, and we'll go back a folder into the models folder and then the customer model. Alright, so the new customer is going to be a new customer, and we'll pass in the name. And then, of course, we want to save the customer. Saved customer is await new customer.save. So basically the same steps to interact with a database, but now for customers. All right, so let's actually do response.json desaved customer. So we just respond with that saved customer. So right now, whenever someone connects to our server, they can always create a new customer, and I can show you that if I just open up Insomnia again. We don't need to be logged in. So I'm going to set up an endpoint for our new customer. Let's create a new request, new customer. And it's going to be a post method with a JSON body. And the endpoint will be, let's just grab one here. So it will be /customer/, and in the JSON, we need to give it a name, and let's do John Doe. So now this should work. I'm going to send it, and as you can see, we got our saved document as a JavaScript object back. And if I look in my database, and I just reload the page here, we should now have a customers collection, and in there we should have that customer. So of course I'm currently logged in Insomnia because we have this cookie set, but if I remove the cookie, of course, we're not checking for that cookie in our route. So let's say I want to save Jane Doe. So I'm going to send it, and it has succeeded. So this route is not protected. It's not a private route for which you need to be logged in. Now, the steps to check if you're logged in is to see if in the request there is a cookie of the name token, and then we want to validate that token, comparing that JsonWebToken validation, the part of the validation to our JWT secret to make sure that that token has also been created by our server. Now, we need to do it for quite a few routes that you want to make private. So it doesn't make too much sense to create the same code over and over again in your handler function. So what I'm going to do is create custom middleware that we can apply to all of our routes that we want to make private. I'll show you how this works. So let's create a new folder called middleware. And as I've already explained, middleware, this here is middleware, this is middleware. Middleware can either be applied to any incoming requests. So what this will do is it will run the JSON function for any incoming request, parsing the JSON to a JavaScript object. Or you can also set them up for specific routes. And we can also set it up for specific routes in your router. We'll do that in a moment. So I want to have this route first before it handles it with this handler function. I want it to first pass the request through a function that is going to authenticate and check the cookie, check the token. Okay, I'm going to put that function in a file called auth.js, and we'll put it into our middleware folder just so we structure our custom middleware. So I'm going to create a function called auth, and this will have a request, a response object, and also a next function. And I'll talk about what this next function does in a moment. So we'll put a try and catch blocking in here again. Let me just grab this catch, although I'm going to change the catch. So, the whole catch, please. So I'm going to change the catch a little bit. So whenever something goes wrong in a try block, I don't just want to send internal server error. I want to send 401, and I want to send JSON, which you can do with the JSON function. JSON. There we go. And I'm going to send an error message of simply unauthorized. So whenever something creates an error in our authentication middleware, I just want to respond with unauthorized. Simply that. I don't want anything else. So we alert the browser that you're unauthorized. Not just an internal server error, it's just unauthorized. I don't care what goes wrong, but something went wrong in the authentication process. You're just unauthorized. So with this, we can detect like hackers doing all kinds of weird things that might create an error on our server. I'm just going to respond back with unauthorized. So now then in the try function, or in the try block, we want to read the cookie. So we can actually get the cookies out of our request. So if I just log in again, so I'm going to log in, and let's say we create a new customer. So let's do Peter Doe send. If I look in my timeline, you can see that in the request, Insomnia, and the browser will do this as well, automatically has sent this cookie because it knows that this cookie belongs to the domain localhost. So whenever we are going to send the request to a localhost, it will also send the cookie. So the cookie will be sent in the request. Now in Express, we can actually get the cookie. Actually, let's do console.log request.cookie. Actually, it will be cookies. And this will be an object where it can store cookies. However, this will not exist currently. And I'm going to show you this. Now, before we actually will check out the cookies, let's actually run the auth function whenever we make a post request for a new customer. We can do this by adding a third argument. So we have our route or a path for this endpoint and the handler function. But if you put another function in between the handler and the path as a second argument, that will be a middleware function. So let's do const auth is require. And we also need to, of course, export our auth middleware. So we'll do module.exports is our auth function. So we'll go back a folder into middleware and then auth. So now we have this function here, and I'm just going to put it there. So what this will do is before it will handle this request, it will first run the request through auth. And auth will then get that same request, and it can also create a response. For example, if I have an error, I want to create a response. I don't want to continue. So what now should happen is that before it handles the request, it's first going to pass through auth, and we will log request.cookies to the console. Let's check it out. So I'm going to create a new customer. So let's do Lisa, though, whatever. I'm just creating different names. You can actually, I think we can use the same name over and over again, doesn't matter. So I'm going to send it. And you can see we have undefined. Now that is because a cookie is actually just a huge string. And you can actually also have multiple cookies sent to in a request. So in this case, we only have this one cookie, but we could also have sent another cookie for another reason that we want the client to send back to the server every time it makes a request. So what we need to do is we need to parse these cookies into a JavaScript object, which is what this cookies is going to be. Now we could do it ourselves with some string code and string parsing code and splitting and whatever, but the better way to do it is to actually use a library that will do it for us. So I'm going to open up a new terminal in the server so we can install npm install cookie-parser. This is a express middleware that will read any incoming cookies and parse it into the request.cookies object, so we can read it. So also here I'm going to say app.use for any incoming request, and we'll grab our cookie parser. Require cookie parser. And this is just a function that will run. So any incoming request will be checked if it has JSON in the body, that will parse to the JSON, or will parse it to request.body. And if there's cookies, it will parse it to the request.cookies. That's what this function will do. So now if we make another request, we should see request.cookies. So let's say I'm going to make another Lisa dough, send it, and we check in the server. And now you can see we actually have our object, which has a token key and the value of that actual JSX token, JWT token. Notice, however, that the request isn't completing. I'll talk about that in a moment. But now at least we can grab the token. So let me just put this into a variable. Token is the request.cookies.token. So now we actually have our JWT token. And now what I would want to check is, well, do we have a token? Because if someone is logged out, the cookie is, well, in this case, the token is empty. So we want to check if we have a token, but also in the browser, of course, it would clear the cookie like this automatically. And yeah, we want to check if a cookie with a token has been sent. So I'm going to say if not token, well, then you are not authorized. So I don't want to continue with the rest of the handler. We just do return response, and actually we do all of this. We set the status code to 401, which means unauthorized, and we'll also display an error message, or we send a JSON object with an error message in case the browser wants to, or the client in the browser wants to display that. So let me show you this in action now. So I've currently logged out. As you can see, we don't have a cookie. So if I'm going to create a new customer, send, now we get the 401 unauthorized, and in our JSON we have the unauthorized error message. So as you can see, we have now detected that we do not have a token. If I change this to Jessica Doe, just a random name, send it, and we check out our database, just reload, we should see that no Jessica has been created. So we see John Doe, Jane Doe, Peter Doe. So no Jessica has been created. Actually, Lisa Doe was still also not created. So as you can see, we have now cancelled this endpoint basically. This authentication middleware has determined that it's not authorized to continue. That's cool. Okay, so we need at least a token, otherwise it will return with a 401 unauthorized. And then we need to validate the token to make sure that no one else has created a token with their own little password, because of course these tokens are signed with a JsonWebToken secret or password. So we can use the JWT library. Let's bring it in. Require JsonWebToken, and we call it JWT, and we can use the verify method in there. So I'm going to say const, and we'll say verified is, and then we'll say JWT.verify. So this will require the token and the secret or public key to compare that token against, to make sure that that token has been created with that key. So we have the token, of course, from the cookie, and then we need to get our process.env.jwt_secret, which is stored in the environment variable on our server. So how does this work? So this will actually return a string or an object. It doesn't actually return like true or false. So what it's going to do is that it's going to do two things. First, it's going to compare the token with the password to make sure that the token has been created with the password. If the token has not been created with this password, it will actually throw an error. So it won't even do anything with this variable, it won't return anything, it just throws an error, it cancels our code. And because we've set up a try and catch block, we catch that error and we just create an unauthorized. So also if our token is not valid, if it's not been created with our JWT secret, we go over here and we log or we return 401 unauthorized. Now let's say the token has been created with the secret. What it then will do is it will decode it. And that decoded payload of the JWT will be put in here. So if you remember, if we go to jwt.io, you can encode a payload in your JWT. And in our server, when we log someone in, we put a user field with that ID of the user in there. So the ID of what a user is called in the database. So what we'll get here is an object with a user field which holds the ID. That will be in this variable. So it will verify it. If it can't verify it, it will throw the error. If it can verify it, it will decode it and it will be put in this variable as an object with our stuff. And actually I can show you that. So if I log the verified token, and we get Jessica Doe going here. Actually we are unauthorized because I'm not logged in. So let's log in. And we create a new customer, send. As you can see, we have now decoded the token. And it is a user with the ID of that test@gmail.com account. And it also has the issued at time string or the time value. In case you need to figure out when the token was created. The JsonWebToken does it automatically. But at least we have the ID of the user. Now this can actually be useful for us. What I'm going to do with this verified user is I'm actually going to put it into a field in request, which I'm going to create. So I'm going to create request.user and we'll set it equal to verified.user, which will be the ID. So that will be this string. So this field, this property user of the request object doesn't exist, but of course in JavaScript we can just create a new property of an object by just typing one. And I'm going to set it equal to verified.user. So that whenever we continue now after the auth function is passed, and we actually handle the rest of the endpoint, the request object will actually have a request.user in there, given to it by the auth middleware, which happened before the main handler function. So if in your endpoint you need to also interact with the logged in user, we now know the ID of that logged in user. It is in the request object. Now in this case we don't actually need to, but maybe you want to, so maybe if I'm going to create a new customer, I also need to store which account has created that user. I might in my customer model also create a user field here, which should be an ID of another, of an actual user account. So we can link this customer to a certain user account who has created that user. So you might want to store that ID in the database, for example. So that is what this is going to allow us to do. It allows us to read the ID in the request in the further handler function. Now, we don't need it right now, but I'm just going to put it in here anyway because it will be very useful. All right, so then there's one final thing to do. So we're basically done now. So we check the token, we check that it's verified, we decode it, and we set it as the requested user. And then we call next. So next is a function that Express gives us. Whenever Express runs this function as a middleware, it passes 3 arguments, the request, the response, and a next function. And this next function then exits out of the auth middleware, and it continues with the next function to run, which will be our handler function in this case. So now we should have a working auth middleware. So let's just run this. So I am currently logged in, as you can see, so it should work for me. So I'm going to create Jessica Doe, send, and as you can see, we have created Jessica Doe. At least it returned 200 OK, and we can check in our database that we should have now Jessica Doe in our database of users, or customers. So there we go, we've created a couple of customers. But if you don't have an account, so let's say I'm logged out, so I'm going to log out with this endpoint here, and I create a new customer. Let's do Lisa, send. Now we are unauthorized. So with this auth middleware, you just have to put this one single line, actually the one single word, the auth, and you have to import it, of course, to your router. But for any endpoints you want to have someone required to be logged in, you just put it as an auth middleware, and then it will unauthorize people if they're trying to use that route, but they're not logged in. Great, so now we have protected a route on our server. I'm going to create one other endpoint, router.get, and this is just going to get all of the users, all of the customers. For this also, I want people to be authenticated. We'll create an asynchronous handler function, and in here we'll just copy all of this. We don't actually need to do anything over here, but I just wanted to get the try and catch block. And what I'm going to do is I want to find all of the customers. So I want to get a complete list, an array of all of the customers in the database. So we can say customers is await, and then we use the customer object or the customer model to find. And when we don't supply a search query in here, it just finds the full collection of customers as an array. And then I'm just going to respond.json the customers. So very simple endpoint. So let me create a new one. We'll just duplicate this one. Get all customers. And it will be a get method. So the path is still the same. It's slash, but it's now a get method, so it's still different. We don't need to send the body. And if you're logged in, we can now get the array. But as you can see, I'm not logged in. I'm unauthorized. So we will log in. Doesn't matter who is logged in currently. You can, of course, set it up yourself that you require a specific user to be logged in. But now you just need to be logged in, and now I can get the array of all of the customers from the database. Okay, so that is how you protect your endpoints, so that you make sure that people need to be authenticated, need to be logged in order to use those. Now that's basically our server done. There's still a couple of small tweaks to make later, but what we're now going to do is set up a very simple React frontend, and I'm going to show you how you can log people in, register people from React. And also make private routes in React so that people can't visit certain pages if they're not logged in. And of course, we also want to store whether or not the user is logged in React. And there's actually a bit of complex stuff going on with that as well. So next up will be the front end with React.